on Sky News Australia. This is the Rita Panahi Show.
Good evening and welcome to the Rita Panahi Show. Coming up tonight, research showing the woke among us are depressed and anxious. I'll have a leading behavioural scientist explain why. We have a superb lineup of guests, including the author of the bestseller, The Parasitic Mind, who argues the far left is systematically undermining Western civilization. You don't want to miss that. Also tonight, talk about strange bedfellows. Militant union leader John Sedka comes out in support of billionaire former pop star Holly Valance, agreeing that Australia has become too politically correct. The woman who schooled Bill Maher twice, Newsweek's Batia Ungar Sargon, on why the media and Democrats are again resorting to lies to smear Donald Trump. And she tells me why she's no longer a lefty. Victoria's unofficial opposition leader, David Limbrick, will be here along with Caroline Marcus. But first, let's go over today's top stories with media writer for The Australian, Sophie Elsworth. Sophie, let's start with the ABC. Their Four Corners program last night aired Ukraine's War, the Other Side, which it described as being a groundbreaking documentary that offers a human perspective on life on the Russian front line and explores what it's like to be both a Russian soldier risking their life and a Russian civilian under daily threat of bombardment. But the Ukrainian embassy described the program in these words: the journalistic equivalent of a bowl of vomit that unquestionably repeated and aired countless blatant lies, historical distortions, racist claims, and propaganda narratives emanating from the Kremlin. Sophie, the statement also said the ABC should be ashamed of itself for airing such a pro-Putin garbage, they called it. Strong words there.
They absolutely are, Rita. This is an extraordinary intervention here over a documentary. Now, when these Four Corners episodes air, they often come with a bit of controversy. But to describe a Four Corners episode as a bowl of vomit is pretty atrocious. And this story is continuing to unfold. But I would say it's quite a remarkable intervention by the Ukrainian ambassador to describe it in such terms, Rita.
Yes, and the Ukrainian embassy is seeking a meeting with the executive producer of Four Corners and the ABC's managing director. It'll be interesting to see what the outcome of that is. They're saying that, what was aired was pro-Putin, pro-violence, it was propaganda, and it wasn't fit to be on the national broadcaster. Now, let's go to this story, which everyone's talking about today. Jetstar plane heading to Bali was forced to turn around mid-flight after a passenger started screaming, swearing, banging on the cockpit door. And let's have a look at some of the footage from the plane.
Can they try and understand what the f***'s going on before you have a comment? You do not understand any of this. Do not. Yeah, exactly. But why? Do you understand what exactly? So do not come at me. Do not, because do not. Get the off me.
Sophie, this has obviously caused mass disruption for those poor passengers. They had to stay in Australia overnight. They left for Bali this morning, and another Jetstar plane to Bali was also delayed. But what do you do when a passenger becomes erratic mid-flight?
Well, Rita, you're a captive audience, really. I mean, you can't leave the plane. You're mid-air. This is really upsetting for those passengers. Let's just point out this is a budget airline on the way to what many would argue a budget holiday destination. And unfortunately, sometimes these things occur, Rita, but that type of behaviour is not acceptable and really distressing for anyone involved.
Well, I think it's worse that it's a budget airline, because I would... you might be generalising here, but probably for a lot of people that would be their holiday for the year, if not 2 or 3 years they've saved up to go overseas, and then to have it all... you know what? I've seen this on overseas flights when a single passenger goes a little bit crazy, and sometimes they just tie them up until they reach their destination. It may be a better solution. Now let's talk about outgoing CFMEU boss John Setka, who weighed in on the controversy around former soap star Holly Valance. Remember Holly told GB News she thought Australia was a nanny state and fast becoming too woke? Well, the very left-wing Setka agrees with Holly. Have a listen to this.
I've been told, oh, you shouldn't do that because that's politically incorrect. I mean, fair income. I mean, where is this country going? I mean, yeah, this is one of the proudest countries in the world and one of the best countries in the world. And if we let a small minority dictate all this wokeism, and you say no to someone, all of a sudden they've got a mental health problem because they're not used to someone saying no to them.
Right.
You know what? Drink a cup of concrete and toughen up a bit.
Drink a cup of concrete and toughen up. I've got to say, I kind of like that. But this is the same John Setka who says we're on stolen land during acknowledgement of country ceremonies at CFMEU before they pour a bunch of concrete on that stolen land. I would have thought that was pretty woke.
I would think so too, Rita, but I'm just having a moment here where I'm trying to fathom that John Setka is in agreement with Holly Valance, as we know her, the former Neighbour actress. I mean, she's becoming a bit of a rock star in Australia because she's speaking what many people are often, Rita, too afraid to say. She's calling out wokeism. She's calling out all these gender issues among young children.
Greta Thunberg. Demonic little gremlin.
That's right. I mean, Holly Valance, I mean, she is really resonating with a lot of people. And I think it's interesting too. She's from the actress side of things. She was an actress, a singer. Often those people are, you know, they're left-leaning. She's anything but, and she's really come out with some key points.
She's explained how she was very much left-leaning, and she's gone through that progression that a lot of people go through where they start off left-wing and then they kind of get familiar with how the world actually works and realise a lot of the things that they believed were vapid and not based on reality. I think she's married to a billionaire these days. She goes by Holly Candy, and we're liking her work. Now let's talk the royals. Hallelujah. Kate has finally been spotted smiling and looking healthy, shopping. TMZ were the first to air this footage of the princess, and it's given rise to a whole bunch of new questions, like why didn't the palace just release a short video with her to put all that speculation and wild scuttlebutt to rest? Their ham-fisted approach, Soph, has undoubtedly hurt the future king, Prince William. No one knew about this alleged affair he had. Now, just about every mainstream media outlet has published the details of this alleged affair, no doubt harming his reputation. For the record, I don't believe it for 1 second, but it's out there now, and it only came about because of this intense speculation about why is Princess Kate missing? Why won't she do a little video? Why was the picture manipulated? It seems like they've really mishandled this whole affair.
They have mishandled it, Rita. And isn't it great to see Princess Catherine looking so well after what many were concerned about her health after this abdominal surgery? It's great to see her, you know, back out and about. They could have stamped out all this speculation and rumours and what have you had they done something like that in the first instance. But as you said, this has dragged on. The rumour mills are being swirling. And it also shows, Rita, that media are not in bed with the royal family, it seems, which a lot of people argue, including Prince Harry, that they are.
On Harry and Meghan, their marriage is being compared to that of King Edward and Wallis Simpson, with one royal biographer calling both the American duchesses very narcissistic, very controlling, very dominating, and both men seeming to need a domineering woman. Both King George and Prince William also likely felt betrayed by their selfish brothers, says Sally Bedell-Smith. Sophie, this is going to get tongues wagging because people love to bag Meghan.
They do, Rita, and there's always been, for a long time, drawn the comparison with Wallis Simpson. The dynamic among the royal family completely changed once Meghan Markle got her toes inside the royal camp. And we've talked about this for years, Rita. She has been very damaging to the royal family. Prince Harry has gone along with her. So I'll be very interested to see what this book says from a very esteemed author who knows a lot about the royals. But there are very interesting similarities between Wallis Simpson and Meghan Markle.
Now, economist Leith Van Onselen told TGB host Luke Grant that Australian living standards are in terminal decline thanks to rapid immigration and the failing Big Australia policy. He said net overseas migration surged higher than its peak from mid last year. It's just another sign that population numbers are out of control, and it's coming at the same time as housing construction is collapsing. We only added one home per 4.5 new residents last year. I was speaking about this last week with an economist. The numbers just don't add up. Where are these people going to go? We've already got a housing crisis. We've got a shortage of rental properties, and we've got housing approvals at 10-year lows with this massive influx coming in.
And that's right, Rita. The net migration last year was over 500,000 migrants coming into Australia. And those figures just at the end there, we're not building enough houses. We don't have enough stock to house all these people. And as you said, there is a rental crisis. It's very hard to secure rental properties now. So this is just a ticking time bomb. Australia cannot cope with this rising population, rising migration, if we don't have places for people to put their heads under.
Well said, Sophie Elsworth. Thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you, Rita.
The ABC's Patricia Karvelas has been outspoken in her support of trans activists, but she was herself schooled on her own program by journalist and author Hannah Barnes on the issue of puberty blockers being used for children.
Come April the 1st, when we have new services opening in England, there will be no medical pathway for young people under the age of 17, so no puberty blockers at all.
That's quite controversial, isn't it?
Is it controversial, or is it just that's evidence-based medicine?
Well, it's controversial because not everyone agrees, as you know.
NHS England has finally critically reviewed transgender medicine in kids and has banned the use of dangerous puberty blockers for minors. When will Australia wake up and do the same? Joining me now is Libertarian Victorian MP for South East Metro, David Limbrick. David, what is happening in Victoria and Australia? Because we seem to be an outlier now when it comes to so-called gender-affirming care.
Well, the situation in Victoria is that gender-affirming care is the only type of care because we passed these laws back in 2021 that made it illegal to provide any other type of care. But what we're seeing in other places throughout the world, such as England and many other Scandinavian countries, is that they're backing away, especially from gender medicine for children, including puberty blockers. They're backing away at 1,000,000 miles an hour after they've made the effort to look at the underlying science behind it. I think in the case of the UK, they're quite special in that the context here is that they're about to drop the final version of the CAS review, which is a big investigation into the scandal of what happened at the Tavistock Clinic. And you'll notice that lots of things in the UK at the moment, politicians and public health people have been backing away from this area of medicine at 1,000,000 miles an hour, presumably because they know what's coming next.
Well, yes, there has been a lot of backtracking and 180 turns, but not in Australia. Like you said, this is the only pathway available. And there's not even been a review done to see if there are problems with this model, if there are harms, what the science behind it really is, and whether it stands up to any sort of scrutiny. Because we spoke to Michael Schellenberger on this program, we spoke to him on Outsiders on Sunday, and he explained just some of the junk science and flawed data that props up gender-affirming care.
Yeah, look, we absolutely need to get eyes on this, on what's happening in Australia, especially in Victoria. There was an attempt last year to get a parliamentary inquiry into this. It was blocked by the government and the Greens. I was very unhappy about that. I thought, if these people are willing to stand behind this medicine, then it should withstand scrutiny. But we urgently need to have some sort of investigation or inquiry to get eyes on what's actually going on in Victoria. What is the science here? And, you know, if there's potential harms, we need to stop them now.
Now, on to other matters. I've called you the unofficial opposition leader in this state because the Libs have been so hopeless for so long, including on the issue we've just been discussing. They went to the last state election promising not to change any element of those policies. That was an election promise of theirs of sorts. What is happening with the Liberal leadership? We're hearing that a challenge is imminent. You're in Parliament, you're there right now. What are you hearing?
I'm not hearing a lot. I'm seeing a lot of nervous-looking Libs around Parliament, but I don't know like what's going on behind closed doors. I haven't heard any announcements of anything yet, so I don't really know. But look, it's clear that there's been a lot of people unhappy with the leadership for some time for a number of reasons. The big question is, like, if they want to install a new leader, who is that, and how are they going to go about doing it, and are they going to be better? I'm not sure where they're at with that, but certainly they've got a lot of problems at the moment, for sure.
And meanwhile, we've got the state government going from crisis to crisis. The debt is at a record level, biggest in the country. Major projects keep blowing out further. Taxes are increasing at a dramatic rate, whether we're talking about for businesses or for investors, things like land tax. How do you see the future of this state? I know it's a big question, but if you're giving me a 30-second answer, I'd appreciate it.
Look, it's clear that the size and scale of the state is unsustainable. We need to scale back the size of government. There's limits to how far they can increase taxes. In many cases, they're simply driving away businesses now rather than raising new taxes. I don't think raising taxes is the answer. Cutting spending is the answer. There's lots of waste in government spending. If we scale back the size of government, we can get ourselves back on a sustainable footing. And I'll be looking at the next budget very carefully and hoping that the government decides to do exactly that.
Well, yeah, we'll all have our fingers crossed, but I think we'll be waiting in vain. David Limbrick, thank you so much for your time. The Australian government was going to list Iran's Revolutionary Guard as a terror group, as the US, Saudi Arabia and Bahrain already have. The Guards, who are the most powerful wing of Iran's state security apparatus, have been responsible for using horrific tactics, including sexual violence, to combat peaceful women's freedom protesters. And they've plotted to kill foreign citizens. And yet Australia changed its mind about its definition as a terrorist group, according to bombshell new documents. Senior reporter Caroline Marcus broke this story for Sky News, and she joins us now. A joint response, Caro, from the Jewish and Iranian communities in Australia was released in response to your article. Firstly, tell me what you found out and what the reaction has been.
Well, Rita, these bombshell documents came about as a result of a Freedom of Information request that was lodged by a member of the Iranian Australian community living here in Sydney. Now, he challenged the government to provide the documents on which it had relied upon in order to make its determination that it couldn't list the IRGC, as they're known, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in Iran, as a terror group. The government had said back in January last year that they considered these guards an organ of a nation state, and therefore they wouldn't be able to list them under the criminal code. So this member of the Iranian community, his name is Arash Begu, he has given us the documents that he received in reply to his Freedom of Information request, while the Attorney General's Department refused him access to the documents that they'd relied upon. It was a schedule of 8 documents that they had found fell in the scope of his request that actually revealed a lot more than perhaps they'd been intending to. In particular, these 2 documents called a Statement of Reasons and a Nomination Form. Now, these 2 documents are essential when the government is looking at listing a terror group. According to the protocol of listing a group under the criminal code, you have to have have these two documents. So the fact that they had those documents, which were dated mid-January last year, meant, according to the opposition, that they were significantly advanced in their listing of the IRGC as a terror group. But somehow, within the space of less than 3 weeks, they did a complete backflip and decided that no, they're not going to list it. Instead, they came up with this legislative reason that it's an organ of a nation state as to why they couldn't. Now, we know, as you mentioned, that the US, they designated the IRGC as a terror group back in 2019. And last year, they actually called on their allies, and Australia being one of them, to follow suit and highlighted the urgency of doing so. The opposition has called for a long time, and in particular, the Assistant Shadow Minister for Foreign Affairs, Claire Chandler, has been pushing for the government to list this group as a terror group ever since she chaired a committee in the wake of these violent crackdowns on the uprisings in Iran that you'll well remember, Rita, that followed the death of Mahsa Amini, that 22-year-old woman who was arrested by the morality police for not wearing her hijab properly, allegedly, and then she died in police custody. Now, after that, this committee released 12 recommendations, the main one being that this group should be listed as a terror organisation. In the past couple of years, we've seen them wreak absolute havoc, especially across the Middle East. Of course, Iran is the world's leading state sponsor for terrorism. Its proxies include Hamas in Gaza, which there have been reports showing that they helped train Hamas militants ahead of the October 7 attacks on Israel. Also provided $10 million in aid, $10 million in weaponry.
We know Iran is an axis of evil country, and it funds terrorism in many parts of the world. And we need some answers to why there was this U-turn on this decision. If they were advanced and they were about to announce this, and then they've backtracked. I know you're exactly the investigative journalist to get to the bottom of it. Caroline Marcus, thank you so much for your time. Still to come, the brilliant Batia Ungar Sargon, a woman who has gone from a woke lefty to a champion of reason and logic. She's even schooled Bill Maher more than once. She joins me next. Welcome back. Joining me now is opinion editor at Newsweek, Batia Ungar Sargon. You're about to release a new book, Second Class: How the Elites Betrayed America's Working Men and Women, which will explore a fascinating political realignment that should hopefully work in the favour of the neglected American working class. It's an issue we've long talked about on this program, but here it's a trend that is evident in the UK, Australia, and certainly in the US, where the affluent are veering very much left and the working and middle class, including many minority groups, are turning to the right. What do you think is behind this phenomenon, this political realignment?
Thank you so much for having me, Rita. It's so great to be here with you and with your audience. Put simply, the Democrats abandoned the working class. So the Democrats used to be the party of labor. And as you put it so eloquently, the left used to be on the side of the working class, of workers, of labor. And that's why they used to, for example, oppose immigration, because mass migration lowers the wages of working class people by increasing the supply of workers, right? It's obvious supply and demand. And as a result, the Democrats used to believe in having a strong border. Now it's Donald Trump who believes in having a strong border. The Democrats used to have the position on abortion, for example, that most Americans had 15 weeks, right? It's very normal in Europe for that to be the length in which you can get an abortion. Now the Democrats believe you should be able to get an abortion into the third trimester. And it's Donald Trump who's running on 15 weeks for abortion, right? The Democrats used to believe in equal opportunity. Now they believe that Dr. King's vision is racist, and it's Donald Trump who's courting Black voters. The Democrats used to be on the side of women and on the side of gay people, and now they are on the side of trans people, and it is Donald Trump who is viewed as being pro-gay and protecting women's rights. So in a way, there's been this realignment, but I would say it's not that minority workers, minority voters are moving to the right. It's that Donald Trump has captured the centrist position on all of these things. And minority voters are very pragmatic. They are very moderate, and they're looking around and understanding, you know, who is the moderate in this race, despite the fact that the media really doesn't want them to realize that.
Well, talking about the media, they have been demented over the past 48 hours because, like you've explained, Donald Trump understands this political realignment very well. He was speaking to auto workers over the weekend who have been incredibly hard done by with Biden's Green New Deal initiatives. Prioritises EVs, Chinese-made cars over American manufacturing, and the workers know that. And so when Donald Trump said there would be bloodbath in the American auto industry, they understood what he was talking about, but the left's trying to paint this as a threat of violence and literal bloodshed in the streets. Tell me about that, and tell me about this Green New Deal, what it means for the American working and middle class.
Absolutely. Yeah, Donald Trump did what he does, which is he gave a solid policy proposal to protect working class jobs and wages. He said if China tries to establish a car factory in Mexico to become part of the USMCA, which is a trade deal that allows cars to come into America from Mexico without tariffs, Trump said, we're going to put 100% tariff on each of those cars. It's the kind of policy that has a direct impact on working class jobs and wages, the kind of thing Democrats used to understand. But because they don't do that anymore and don't represent labor, they can't just admit that Trump has taken their policy. So instead, what they do is they invent these outrages to smear him with, to make him seem like an extremist, to hide the fact that this is good policy for the working class. You asked about the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal is class warfare against the working class. The climate extremism comes directly from the most over-credentialed elite rich people who have nothing else to worry about because they have so much money. And what they do is they have created this apocalyptic religion out of climate change. And then they go around flying around in their private jets and demanding sacrifices from the working class, making electricity, gas unaffordable, putting these electric vehicles out there that sit on lots because working class people, A, can't afford them, and B, they drive really far because they live in rural America. What are they going to do with a car that has to be get electricity every 3 hours? I mean, it's so ridiculous. It's really class warfare. They are asking the working class to pay literally for their vanity morals. It is totally appalling. All of the green stuff, like you said, happens in China. The wind turbines imported from China, by the way, slave labor making them in China because that is China's competitive advantage. Slavery, right? Hello. That's imported from China. The EVs now, they're going to start importing them from China. The Green New Deal, getting rid of the Keystone XL pipeline, which was going to have 10,000 union jobs, good union jobs, and all of the green jobs are minimum wage, no benefit, temporary jobs.
You are so right. And we are seeing precisely the same thing happening in Australia. Everything you're talking about, this green religion and how it impacts different groups. We are seeing it right here, and they're seeing it in the UK as well. This isn't limited to the US. Now, you were recently called upon to school Bill Maher, who, despite being very logical and sound on so many issues, he is most certainly affected by a severe case of Trump derangement syndrome. And it leads him to make some really hysterical comments. And you were on his program again recently, and you pointed out that Trump is considered an extremist by the left, but for his supporters and an increasing number of independents and centrists, that's what the polls are telling us. He is entirely sane, reasonable, and moderate. He's very far from the right-wing bogeyman of the left's fever dreams. Why do they have this impression of him and this need to demonize him? Is this the best way to defeat him, perhaps?
I think you put your finger on it. They absolutely don't believe they can defeat him at the ballot box. And so they're doing everything they can, including trying to put him in prison. It goes very, very deep. Their contempt for him is an extension of their contempt for the working class. There's nothing that the college educated hate more than the working class. They have this real sneering contempt for them. And Trump, who showed up sort of like the return of the repressed, right? The return of the idea that the working class should have dignity. He's the biggest threat to the emptiness of the expert class and to their moral emptiness, their intellectual emptiness, and the real scam that they pulled on America, where they took an economy that was securing the American dream for working class people, ensuring them a middle class lifestyle, and they created out of that beautiful economy an economy that only works for the top 20%, that only works for the college educated. And if you're working class, you are second class in America. And he exposed that scam where people who are millionaires will sit on, these liberal TV stations and sneer at the working class and then masquerade as the good guys. It's so appalling. And he exposed them. And so they cannot forgive him for it. They will not stop until he's in prison.
Well, that's what they're trying to do. And the political elite seem to have this complete blind spot when it comes to half the country, half of America. If they're worried about Trump, then they're going to be terrified of what comes next, because that voter base is fed up. They're not going to tolerate another rhino Republican in name only. The days of those quislings on the right leading the Republican Party, those days are coming to an end.
I'm so glad to hear you say that, because I think even people on the right in America are a little bit in denial about that. And you saw this with Nikki Haley, for example. The entire Republican donor class was in her corner. She outspent Trump 2-1 because the Republican elites are desperate to get back to the kind of free trade, free market, chamber of commerce, tax cuts version of the party that existed before Trump, in which they also ignored the working class, just like the Democrats. And you're completely right. I mean, the entire voter base for the Republicans is working class now, pretty much. And they are not going to go back to the chamber of commerce. There's one thing that Republican working class people hate more than they hate the Democrats, and it's the Republican Party, because they feel like the Republican Party really pimped them out. And for them, Trump was really a godsend.
Absolutely. And I think obviously economic factors are enormous, as we've discussed, but there's also the values, having this far left identity politics shoved down their throat, shoved down their kids' throat, just dominating the culture. That's, again, something else that the Democrats seem to be blind about, how that's perceived by so many just regular folk. Now, switching tack, you wrote a really powerful piece. I encourage everyone to read it. It was for Spiked. And you were highlighting there that it's not just the working class that are being left behind by the left, but also women who were kidnapped, raped, murdered by Hamas. It was an important piece. Why is that? How can they justify abandoning women who were treated so appallingly, and so much of it was captured on video? We don't even have to imagine what happened to these women. We know.
And it's still happening, unfortunately, to some of the women being held hostage in Gaza by Hamas. Rita, thank you so much for highlighting this and for highlighting my piece. It means a lot to me. People really don't want to talk about this. It's really difficult to talk about it. There are sort of two main reasons, I think, that it's become so easy for the left to ignore the plight of these women. The first is, and I'm sure you're seeing this as well in your country, I think feminists have gotten used to being asked to defend rapists, for example, transgender rapists who then demand to be put in a woman's prison, or they've become regulated to being asked to defend a young man who decides he's a young woman and then demands to play on a women's wrestling team, right? Like the transgender agenda has made feminists get habituated to defending the abuse of women. And so there's almost this natural, they've started to have to question themselves when they're asked to defend women, right? Aren't we supposed to be defending the other side? And the other thing that I think is at play here is, the woke ideology really is a binary. It says we don't distinguish anymore between right versus wrong. We are not allowed to do that. Who are we as white people or as oppressors to say what is right and what is wrong? No, there's only powerful versus powerless. And whoever we decide has less power, they are inherently virtuous. Their powerlessness is virtue. They've lost the ability to distinguish between right and wrong. They see powerlessness as virtue, and they ascribe powerlessness to anyone with darker skin color. So, for example, any person of color has inherent virtue because they are inherently powerless, and any white person is inherently evil because they are seen as powerful.
But Batia, there is a clause there, though. There is an exception, and that is if they're conservative, if the person of colour, whether they're black, brown, is conservative, then all those oppression points are at the window, and I can tell you that personally. Just before you go, you were perhaps woke once, or at the very least left-leaning, left-wing. Could you just tell me quickly what led to your political awakening? What red-pilled you, as the kids say?
I'll tell you the first moment it happened. It wasn't like all at once. It was sort of slowly and then all at once. But the first moment that I had an inkling that there was something wrong with my worldview was when I encountered a 2018 Yale study that found that there was a difference between how white liberals and white conservatives talk to people of color. And this was the difference. When a white liberal encounters a black person or a Hispanic person, they dumb down their vocabulary, and white conservatives don't do this. And I remember thinking to myself, and we call them the racists? I mean, it's so racist, but I, of course, immediately recognized myself and everyone I knew, because that is wokeness in a nutshell. That was what it meant to be on the left. And that was the beginning of my unwokening, as I say.
It's a good beginning. You're right. The bigotry of low expectations, it's very strong among the left, and they're often completely blind to it. But yeah, thank you so much for your time this evening. It was a pleasure to speak with you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much, Rita.
Still to come, research shows the woke are more likely to be depressed and anxious. I'll have a leading evolutionary biologist, the great Dr. Gad Saad, explain why those who identify as left-wing report higher rates of mental health issues. Welcome back. Joining me now is evolutionary behavioural scientist and author of the bestseller, The Parasitic Mind, How Infectious Ideas Are Killing Common Sense, and his latest book, The Sad Truth About Happiness, Dr. Gad Saad. So good to speak with you again. Let's talk happiness and wokeness. I was fascinated to see this piece in the New York Post today revealing one truth about happiness. It seems that you're less likely to experience it if you're woke. A Finnish study has found a high prevalence of anxiety and depression among people who hold woke beliefs. They also found that those who identified as left-wing were more likely to report lower mental well-being than those who were right-wing or apolitical. Is that what you found in your research as well, Dr. Saad?
Right. Well, great to be with you again, Rita. Yeah, so in my latest book, the happiness book, I actually talk about various correlates to happiness, one of which is a ubiquitous finding that's been found in the literature, namely that your political orientation is correlated with happiness. Specifically, conservatives on average are happier than liberals or progressive, or as the Finnish study says, woke people. Now, I offer an explanation for that in the book. And I basically argue that, when conservatives wake up in the morning, by the very definition of the word conservative, they think that there is a set of values that are worth conserving in the current society. So they wake up with a sense of existential happiness. It doesn't mean that the society is perfect, but they're in a good place existentially. On the other hand, the wokester wakes up with existential doom, right? We live in a transphobic society. We live on stolen land. We live in a misogynistic society. We're committing genocide on indigenous people. And therefore, if only we can re-engineer society, around the corner, we'll be able to find unicornia. So the Finnish study doesn't surprise me at all.
Now, your previous book, The Parasitic Mind, was a sensation. And when it came out, I still said referred to constantly online. It explores how parasitic ideas are spreading like a virus across the West, killing reason and killing freedom. But one of the things that confuses people on the left to this day is, what do we mean when we say woke? So if I could get from you a definition of that word, and if you could also explain to my audience why you say this ideology is poison.
Well, it's parasitic because once you hold on to those beliefs, it is contrary to your best interest. So let me give you an example of what constitutes a parasitic mechanism. So for example, the wood cricket is a cricket that abhors water. But when it is parasitized by a particular worm, neuroparasite called a hairworm, the hairworm needs to get the wood cricket to jump into water in order for it to complete its reproductive cycle. So once that wood cricket is parasitized by this neuroparasite, it merely jumps to commit suicide because it serves the interest of the parasite. And so in my book, The Parasitic Mind, what I argue is that human beings can also be parasitized not only by actual physical worms, they could be parasitized by ideological worms. So postmodernism, cultural relativism, radical feminism, transgender activism, the rejection of biology in explaining human behavior, which I call biophobia. All of these parasitic ideas, when put together, create the wokesters that you see walking around on university campuses.
Well, one of their ranks is Don Lemon, television host Don Lemon. He had his exclusive contract to host the Don Lemon Show on X cancelled by Elon Musk just hours after his premiere episode, which featured Elon Musk. You very kindly gave Don Lemon some sage advice. Can you share that with my audience? And do you think he will take it? Is it too far gone? Is the parasitic mind taken hold with Don Lemon?
Yes, I fear that my advice is impenetrable to his fully parasitized mind. Basically, what I told him is, look, you have the opportunity here to speak to arguably the person that most people would be most desirous to speak to, a truly historic figure who's done unbelievable things. And there are so many things that you could explore with him. You're given this opportunity, and yet you can't extricate yourself from the gotcha strategies, from the accusatory tones and so on. What a wasted opportunity. And as I think we might talk about, just a few days later, it so happened, yesterday actually, Elon and I had a conversation on an X Spaces. So far, it's been watched, I think, tuned in by nearly 750,000 people. No accusations, no virulence, just two guys down to earth that hopefully have interesting things to say, having a fun chat. And it was even fun in that we were debugging some of the features of the latest option on the X Spaces in vivo, like online. So that shows you, the humility with which we approached each other. And Don Lemon completely missed the opportunity to really have a wonderful conversation with a brilliant guy.
And it was back on CNN within minutes, moaning about his ex-contract. I mean, he's still allowed to be on the platform. His account hasn't been banned. Tell me about that chat with Elon Musk. You were hosting it. He was one of the participants, and I saw a bit of it. But what did you learn? What came out of that was most valuable for you?
I think, I mean, there's specific content that was valuable in that I was asking Elon, do you think that entrepreneurship proclivity is due to nature or nurture? So I asked him technical, interesting, pointed questions. But I think what I got most out of it is a personal element, which is, here's a guy who is, I suppose, the richest person who's ever lived. And if you see how down to earth he is, how humble he is, he was joking around with me, he was pranking me. That's, I think, what was most remarkable about this guy, right? I mean, if you ever would think about someone who should have a chip on his shoulder, it would be Elon, and yet he was anything but that. And so I found that so refreshing, so invigorating, and I think that's probably the thing that, made me feel the best about that chat.
Now, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson from the US Supreme Court seems to not understand the Constitution she is meant to protect. She expressed concerns that the First Amendment was hamstringing the federal government too severely. What do you make of today's shock revelations about the Supreme Court Justice appointed by Joe Biden?
So I'll begin, before I answer that, I'll go on an oblique tangent for a second. Until about 15 minutes ago, the 117 billion people who've been estimated to have existed on Earth absolutely knew the definition of male or female. But yet when she was being confirmed, if you remember, she said that, she's not a biologist, so she couldn't, right? So if we have a Supreme Court justice who's incapable of telling us what a woman is, then I'm not surprised that she's having some difficulties understanding the intricacies of the First Amendment mechanisms. But to answer your question more directly, this is actually something that I speak about in The Parasitic Mind, the difference between deontological and consequentialist ethics. Deontological ethics are absolute statements of truth. So freedom of speech should be a deontological principle. You never say, I believe in freedom of speech, but on the other hand, if your spouse asks you, do I look fat in those jeans? Then you could put on your consequentialist hat, because then you might say, I'm going to lie to spare my spouse's feelings. But when it comes to foundational principles that are enshrined in the First Amendment, it has to be a deontological principle. And apparently our justice, U.S. Supreme Court justice, is unaware of that distinction. So it was grotesque, but it didn't surprise me.
It is disturbing. It is disturbing to have someone in her position make a comment like that. It wasn't just one comment. I've listened to the whole questioning she had around that First Amendment, and wow, astonishing. Now, I want to ask you about musician Neil Young. He has announced he's going to come back to Spotify after he quit the site because of Joe Rogan and supposed disinformation. He got all sorts of excuses for the backflip here, but in the end, it seems when it comes to these celebrity opinions, they love to grandstand, but they also love money, and they love that Spotify money perhaps more than their principles.
You're right. And I mean, one of the things that I love, to go back to Elon, and I think one of the reasons my voice resonates is because I think that we really are driven by a set of principles and we don't deviate from them. But when you look at all of these imbeciles in Hollywood and all these actors and singers, they go with how the wind blows, right? And so when everybody was saying, if Donald Trump were to win in 2016, I'm moving to Canada. I live in Canada. I'm still waiting for Cher to move to Canada. She hasn't apparently moved to Canada yet. And so from this side of their mouth, they grandstand, and from this side of their mouth, they violate all of their quote principles. They're grotesque. They're idiots. They don't have a moral compass.
Before you go, I have to get your opinion on how things are going in Canada. Your great and fearless leader, Justin Trudeau. What's the political environment like in Canada? And is Trudeau in peril? Will he survive the next election?
Well, certainly the polls are showing that he is in peril. And so if the elections were to happen tomorrow, I think that he'd be, it would be, dare I say a bloodbath? Am I allowed to say a bloodbath, or am I calling for a genocide if I use the word? Maybe I shouldn't say that.
Yeah, well,
it would be a massacre. Can I say that? Or that's also incitement to violence. But anyways, look,
don't say a landslide either, because that's frightening. It won't be a landslide either. Yes.
Right. No, I think he would definitely lose. And You know, I received a text a few days ago from Elon, a private one, where he said, hey, I wonder, how is it that you could survive in Canada with such rampant woke mind viruses? And so to your question, it's very difficult for me, not only to be in Canada, but to be within the university ecosystem in Quebec, because my own university, there are many things that I love about it. It's very, very woke. And so it is definitely difficult to walk on my shoes on a daily basis, but I do it hopefully with a smile.
Well, we rely on you, Dr. Saad, and Jordan Peterson to fight the good fight in Canada. I know there is others, but you two are leading the way. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Really do appreciate it. And that's it from me tonight. Don't go anywhere. News Night is coming up next. I'll see you at 11 tomorrow. Good night.